Hey, Emily, thanks for meeting with me today to talk about your article,
Mhm.
Emotions, a Brief Introduction.
Yes, I think it was pretty clear in the article that this is like just scratching the surface of everything we could talk about in this topic. But yeah, so brief introduction is true.
Yeah, I got a kick out of that. I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And you started your article by talking about primary or core emotions. Tell us, like, what are some examples of that?
Yeah, so there are different like theories out there on how many core emotions there are, but you typically see like at least the same base six, and then some theories will have seven or eight, and they'll add a couple on. But examples would be like sadness, fear, anger, excitement, joy. Kind of if you think of like Inside Out, all the little characters that you see in the first Inside Out are what we would call like primary or core emotions. Yeah. I like to think of them as like primary colors. They're the base of everything.
Yeah, how
Mhm.
fun for there to be a movie geared towards children that can give us some insight into what our emotional systems are like. And it
Mhm.
was fun. You talked about them being like primary colors because as I was reading this, I was like, yeah, but what about like disappointment or
Mhm.
frustration? And thinking of those in color terms, it totally makes sense. Like, oh, it could be a combination of this and this, or this, and this.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think a lot of times people try and narrow it down to just like one emotion and it doesn't fit perfectly with that one. So it's realizing like it could be a combination of like all six core emotions coming out into like one maybe word that conceptualizes it a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that feels really freedom giving because it's like, well, just start with what you can sense or what you know, and you can branch out and dig in. And you listed this resource, the emotion wheel. What is
Mhm.
this?
Yeah, you find them all over. But it's essentially just like a wheel where it'll have like at the center of the wheel have the core emotions, and each one, because of what theory they're operating out of, might have a few different
Yeah,
words in
that
there,
makes
but then
sense.
it goes out into a bunch of other words that can fall under that. So for instance, like under sad, it could branch out and have words like lonely or disappointed or rejected and words
Mm,
like that. And I really like the wheel because it helps you get one vocabulary around what you're feeling, because sometimes sad just isn't specific enough.
yeah.
It's like an offshoot of sad, like I'm sad but what's happening. So it gets specific in that way, but I also like it in that it gets specific in the other direction, where when you're trying to identify what the core emotion is and you're stuck, you're like, I'm disappointed but I don't know where it
Mm.
leads me to, it can help then get back in like specific towards the other direction. So it helps you kind of narrow everything down in both directions.
I feel like I need to print one of these and have them on my desk so that I
Yeah.
can just be like, oh, I know I feel this, but
Mhm.
what might that be leading
Oh my, I have clients with a pillow of it. So in therapy, I'll be like, so what is that? And they'll like pull up their pillow and look
That's
at it.
perfect.
Yeah.
I love that there's a tangible resource that we can access. It's really helpful. And it matters in all the things of life because emotions are in our bodies.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you talked about that. You said we can't think our way through emotions, we have to physically feel our way through them. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think like that's also part of it where like that's a really brief part of this because it can get so complicated. Well, not, it's really basic, but also like the neuroscience of everything can get really complicated. But emotions are a physical sensation, right? It's why we have tears. It's why our cheeks flush when we're embarrassed or something. And it's why we get the lump in our throat when we're trying to fight something off, or our stomach gets all up in knots. And we have all these sayings that talk about the physicality of emotion, but then we find ourselves actually trying to think our way through and logic our way through an emotion. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Which is what kind of ends up like resulting in us on these situations where we're like, I know this, but I feel this. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it's because I find that people spend a lot of time processing on a cognitive level their emotion. So then their brain is on like chapter 15 of a book, but their body is stuck on chapter like um
That's really good.
yeah. And so we're trying to then get the body to catch up to what like maybe the brain already knows. And so when I say like you need to feel your way through it, is you need to allow yourself to cry, or you need to allow yourself to just sit with like sadness, or if you're angry, then maybe you need to like, allow yourself to just feel angry. And lean into it. You need to just actually physically feel the emotion before you just jump to the logic of, oh, well, that's not true, or that's not actually what happened, or right, as Christians, I just need to surrender it to God, right? Which is
Yeah.
true, doesn't take away from the fear or the anger.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so pretty much what I mean by that is like, don't jump to logic, just validate what you're feeling first, acknowledge it, feel
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. You said acknowledge it when we're noticing it, acknowledge it, feel it, and then share it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why do we have to share these emotions? Why
I
can't
know
we
it's
just hold our own emotions privately? They can be embarrassing.
emotions are vulnerable. It's a really
Yeah.
vulnerable thing to talk about our emotions. But at the end of the day, God didn't create us to process things in isolation. God created us for community and support. Right. And we can
Yeah.
see that just like in the very beginning of the Bible, like he creates Eve for Adam
Yes.
because he's not meant to be alone. None of us are meant to be alone. Um, and so it just does something to our nervous system to be able to share with a person. And so but it also does something to our nervous system to name it, right? Like
Mm,
just naming and acknowledging what we're feeling decreases the intensity of it. Whereas like when we refuse to
yeah.
acknowledge it, I always tell my clients, I always tell them like, bear with me, but like emotions are kind of like sin, where when we have something we're struggling with and we keep it inside, it just grows and grows and grows and grows because darkness
Yeah.
just grows. Whereas like the
Yeah.
second we acknowledge what we're struggling with, the power of sin kind of decreases in that moment because someone else is sharing it with us.
Yeah.
Emotions are the same way. When we just keep them inside and we ignore them and we try not to acknowledge that it's there, they actually just grow in strength and just take over even more. But the second we acknowledge their existence and then share them, it just decreases
Yeah.
the intent. It makes
Oh,
it lightens.
it's like if we can get over that one little vulnerable hump, there's a release of pressure on the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just had clients today, just like before this, where, they're telling me things that they haven't been able to share with someone yet. And I'm just asking, like, how's it feel to just talk about it? Finally, just talk about it. And they're like, it just feels lighter.
Yeah.
They're still
Yeah.
crying or they're still
Yeah.
angry. They still feel, but all of a sudden they know that I'm in it with them. And that in
Yeah.
itself just makes it so much more bearable.
So
Um,
powerful.
yeah. So just wanting to share. And in counseling, we have this term that we're always talking about. We say like we're trying to undo a person's aloneness, like just never let them feel like they're alone. Like if all else fails in my counseling sessions, if I can undo my client's aloneness and let them know that I'm there with them, then we
Yeah.
can still do an amazing thing in that session. And so
Yeah.
always being then to help and encourage people to undo their aloneness by sharing with another person, because there's nothing worse than being in isolation and what you're feeling.
Yeah.
That's why we need to
Absolutely.
share, is because at the crux of it is like we just weren't created to do it alone.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, let me end our time together by talking about this one last point that you make. And you're like, by the way, at the end, I just wanted to say, if you just only try to block out the big, terrible emotions, bad things happen to your other good emotions that you want to. Will you just speak on that for a second?
Yes. Again, like if we talk about Inside Out, we see this concept play out, right? Where it's like Joy tried to stifle of the other emotions, but then realizing like we can't have one without the other.
Mm,
Um, and so it's that same thing where like we like to think that we can push away all the difficult emotions. So like anger and sadness and fear and never have to deal with them.
yeah.
But body can't differentiate between like what emotion you're trying to push away. So then it ultimately just ends up with us not feeling as much joy and excitement,
Mm,
and like that, because we can't pick and choose what we're going to tell ourselves we can feel. So then it just, all the emotions get dampened. And that's just not what we want.
Yeah, that's not the thriving life we're looking for.
No, it's not. And yeah, like I'll have people be like, I just don't feel like I'm as excited or as joyful as I used to be. And I'm like, well, it's probably because you spent so much energy trying to suppress parts of you instead of just welcoming them and leaning into them. So we just have to learn that, like, all parts of us, all emotional parts of us, are welcomed and safe and okay.
Mm, I love that. I love that opportunity to make space for all the parts of ourselves and make
Mhm.
space for them by noticing the emotions that God actually gave us in our bodies.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Love it.
Well, thanks for this article and introducing us to this topic. And thanks for taking the time to meet with me and chat with me about it.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
All right. I'll see you in the next one.